Hello and welcome back to another video. After almost a month of Scottish Island life in the Outer Hebrides, we took a ferry back to the mainland. The crossing took about 5.5 hours, and when we arrived it was astonishing how different everything looked from when we had left. Having spent a month on an almost treeless island, the vibrant yellows and orange and reds of the autumn leaves seemed to be glowing. It almost felt a bit overwhelming, like my eyes had to adjust to the sudden burst of colour, like someone had just turned up the saturation. We drove a couple of hours to an area in the Highlands called Knapdale, where we had planned to stay the night, to camp in our car. On the way, we stopped to go for an evening walk around the loch. I was pretty exhausted from the journey, but absolutely loved soaking up my first proper taste of autumn. We're having hot chocolate made by Josh. Very, very tasty. The next morning we decided to go for an early pre-breakfast hike around another loch, which, spoiler alert, took a lot longer than we expected. We're walking around a loch right now, and we're in a Celtic rainforest. You might be able to hear and maybe even see the rain dripping off the leaves because it literally just rained. And there's beavers in the area because I think in 2009 they reintroduced them, and we haven't actually spotted the beavers, but we saw quite a few signs of them existing, and it's quite exciting. Most of our hike led us through Celtic rainforest, a unique kind of woodland, full of trees dripping with lichen, trunks covered in thick moss, and the ground a carpet of rich undergrowth, lush and wet and full of life. There used to be lots of Celtic rainforests on the British Isles, but just like ancient forests in general, only tiny fragments of this habitat remain. Nowadays, you mainly find them on steep-sided slopes above rivers and around lakes, where they are more likely to escape clearances, sheep or cattle grazing, and replacement with conifer plantations. This bit of Celtic rainforest was bordering plantations, and you can really see the contrast. Suddenly it's all dark and dry and barren. The plantation trees are planted so close together that nothing much can grow in their shadow. The native Celtic rainforest naturally springs back to replace it if we give it a chance. We found a fallen tree, and where the roots had been lifted, a young oak tree had started to grow, high up on the root plate in a patch of sun. Halfway through our hike, we found an abandoned village. The earliest evidence of the settlement was found on a map from 1663. And then there are records from 1841 suggesting that around that time the village consisted of 6 households, with 34 inhabitants in total. But unfortunately, just 7 years later, the settlement became victim of one of the most notorious episodes of forced evictions in the area. As far as we know, the last person who ever lived in the village was an old woman called Catherine Blue, who was listed at Kilmary Cottage in 1901. At the time, lots of the buildings around her cottage had already lost their roofs. Next to her cottage, there was a 9th century medieval cross carved into stone, standing by a holy well. And while I was splashing my face with water, I wondered if, maybe 120 years ago, Catherine Blue drank from this very well. And who knows, maybe even back then there might have been a patch of watercress that she could pick to have with her meals. But what? And then, in the fringes of a gloomy plantation, we spotted chanterelles, or Pfifferlinge, as we call them in Germany. They looked almost luminous in the dark moss. My grandfather already used to forage them when my mum was a child. Freshly foraged, these mushrooms are so much tastier than from the store, and I genuinely got so excited to have them for breakfast the next day. But remember that some edible mushrooms have deadly lookalikes, so please be careful, seek advice, and do lots of research if you're just starting on your foraging journey. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I will see you next time for part 2 of our Celtic rainforest adventures.